Hello, my name is Trevor Henderson. I am 31 years old. If you had asked me 10 years ago whether I thought I would be standing here, owning an online company worth tens of millions of dollars, I would have burst out laughing and told you that it was nothing short of a fairy tale. But life, as my grandmother used to say, is a bumpy road where you only know how far you've gone when you look back. And when I look back, I see a boy who grew up in a poor rural area in the Midwest of America, where people's biggest dream was just a stable job and a roof that didn't leak. I was born in a small town where everyone knew each other so well that you couldn't buy a can of soda at the store without being asked about your entire family tree. My father, Dennis, was a welder, a man with calloused hands and a gruff temperament. He worked all day in the workshop, drenched in sweat, but I never saw him truly smile. My mother, Sharon, was the librarian at the local high school. She was gentler, but always busy with books and students whom she treated like her own children. I don't blame my parents. They did everything they could with what they had. But sometimes I felt like a shadow in my own home. I have a younger brother, Kyle, who is 7 years younger than me. Kyle was the golden boy of the family. From the moment he was born, he was pampered by our parents. Mom always said Kyle had intelligent eyes, and Dad believed he would achieve great things. I'm not jealous really, but when you grow up in a family where all the attention is focused on your little brother, you learn to walk on your own without waiting for anyone to hold your hand. School was never easy for me. I wasn't dumb, but I wasn't the type of student that teachers praised either. I often sat at the back of the class, daydreaming about things bigger than this town, the glittering cities I only saw on TV. But whenever I talked about those dreams, Dad would brush them off. Don't dream big, Trevor. Just learn a trade, like me, and that's enough. Mom was gentler, but she didn't encourage me much either. Maybe they thought I would end up like them, living a quiet life without any turbulence. When I was 18, I left home. It wasn't because of any big argument or anger. I just felt that if I didn't go, I'd be stuck forever. I packed a few sets of clothes, some savings from my part-time job at the grocery store, and got on a bus to the city. I didn't have a clear plan. I just knew I wanted a different life. The first days in the city were a nightmare. I did all sorts of jobs, dishwashing, waitering, even construction work at times. There were nights when I slept in an old beat-up truck I bought cheaply, eating dry bread and drinking water from public fountains. I remember once looking in the truck's rearview mirror, seeing my gaunt face with sunken eyes and asking myself, "What the hell are you doing with your life, Trevor?" But I didn't give up. Maybe because I'm stubborn, or maybe because of the stories my grandmother Edith told me when I was little. She was the only one in the family who believed I could do something great. Every summer I was sent to my grandparents' farm on the outskirts of town. There, amid the golden cornfields and the roosters crowing every morning, I felt free. Grandma taught me how to grow vegetables, care for chickens, and more importantly, she taught me that life isn't about what others think of you, but what you dare to do to prove it to yourself. One cold night, as I huddled in the truck, I was scrolling on my phone and stumbled upon an article about dropshipping, an online business model where you don't need inventory, don't need a lot of capital, just a laptop and persistence. I don't know why, but it was like a spark in my mind. I thought, if I don't try, I'll be sleeping in this truck forever. So I started. I spent hours at the public library, borrowing free Wi-Fi, learning how to build a website, find suppliers, and market products. I failed repeatedly. The first ad campaigns ate up what little money I had, but no one bought anything. There were times I wanted to smash my cheap laptop in frustration. But then, one day, the first order came in. Someone from as far away as California bought an LED nightlight from my website. I remember yelling in the library, making the librarian glare at me. From that $20 order, I started to believe I could do it. I worked like crazy. 16, 18 hours a day, learning, experimenting, failing, and getting back up. I figured out how to optimize ads, improve the website, and gradually the small orders turned into a steady stream of revenue. After 3 years, I had a small online company with a few remote employees. By the 5th year, my company was generating tens of millions in revenue. I couldn't believe my eyes when I looked at the bank balance. From a kid sleeping in a truck, I had built something that even my parents couldn't have imagined. But the strange thing is, even with the money, I didn't want to change much. I didn't buy supercars, didn't live in a mansion, didn't wear expensive watches. I just bought a small apartment in the city, enough for a workspace and a comfortable bed. Maybe because I'd lived in poverty before, I knew that happiness isn't in luxuries. Happiness for me is when I call my grandmother and hear her laugh telling stories about the new chicks hatching on the farm. Happiness is knowing I've come a long way, not to prove it to anyone else, but to myself. I often think about my family, about the days when I was young and everything was simpler. My parents, though not perfect, raised me. They worked tirelessly, and I know they sacrificed a lot. I wanted to do something so they could rest, so they could see that I, the son they once thought was just ordinary, had accomplished something worthwhile. So I decided to buy them a new house, not a mansion, but a spacious one with a small garden and large windows overlooking a tree-lined street. I also bought a new SUV, the kind my dad used to stare at when watching ads on TV. The day I took them to see the house, Mom hugged me and cried, while Dad, still keeping his gruff demeanor, patted my shoulder so hard I almost fell. "Good job, son," he said, and I could sense a bit of pride in his voice, something I rarely heard. I started sending money to my parents every month. Not enough for luxury, but sufficient for them to retire early without worrying about bills or groceries. Dad quit his job at the welding shop and Mom left the school library. They moved into the new house and I occasionally visited, seeing Mom planting flowers in the garden and Dad sitting in an armchair reading the newspaper. I thought, this is enough. I had done something meaningful for them, just as my grandmother had taught me. Family is where you return, where you give without keeping score. But the person I love the most, the one always in my heart, is my grandmother Edith. She was the cool breeze in the sweltering summer days of my childhood. Every summer when my parents were busy with work, I was sent to my grandparents' farm. There I ran around the cornfields, chased chickens, and sat on the porch listening to her stories. She had a way of talking that made everything come alive, from stories about Grandpa in his youth to lessons on living honestly. "Trevor," she once said, "you may not have much money, but if you live true to yourself, you'll never be poor." Those words etched deeply into my mind, especially during the days I slept in the truck, hungry and desperate. When I started my business, she was the only one who truly believed in me. I remember calling her once, right after failing an ad campaign and losing all my savings. I told her I wanted to give up. She just laughed, her voice over the phone warm like sunlight. "Trevor, if you fall, get back up. I know you're stronger than that." And I did get up, for her, for myself. Now, with everything I have, I wanted to do something for her. I invited her to come live with me in the city in my small but cozy apartment. I imagined her sitting by the window reading books or telling me stories like old times. But she shook her head, smiling. "Thank you, but I belong to this farm. This is where your grandpa is, where my memories are." I didn't insist because I understood her. Instead, I drove back often to visit, bringing small gifts. Sometimes a wool scarf, sometimes the orange marmalade she liked. Every time I sat with her on the porch listening to the wind blow through the fields, I felt like I was back in childhood where everything was peaceful. Then there's Kyle, my brother. Kyle is now 24, a tall, handsome guy with a smile that could melt anyone. But Kyle, how to put it, always dreams big without wanting to sweat for it. He grew up spoiled by our parents, always hearing that he was special. Maybe that's why Kyle doesn't like hard work. He wants to get rich quick, to become a millionaire overnight. When I started making money, Kyle would call often, telling me about his brilliant business ideas, from tech apps to fashion stores. I knew most of those ideas weren't feasible, but I still wanted to help. After all, he's my brother. I invested some money in his first startup project, an app for food delivery. I thought if he had a chance, he'd learn to stand on his own feet. In the early days, Kyle was very excited. He sent me long plans talking about how he'd beat Uber Eats. I laughed, encouraged him, and kept sending money for him to hire programmers. But deep down, I was worried. Kyle didn't have the patience I once had. He wanted everything fast, and when the app didn't take off as expected, he started losing interest. I tried to advise him, "Kyle, anything takes time. It took me 5 years to build my company." But he just shrugged, saying I was luckier. I didn't argue, just hoped that one day he'd understand. As time passed, I felt everything was on the right track. My parents were living comfortably in the new house. Kyle wasn't successful yet, but was still trying, and I had peaceful weekends with my grandmother. I thought I'd done the right thing, that family bonds were irreplaceable. But then, like an unexpected cold wind, the first signs of trouble began to appear. Dad called more frequently, his voice no longer one of thanks, but of requests. "Trevor, I need some money to fix this or that," he said. And I didn't think much of it, just transferred the money. Kyle started talking about new investment opportunities, projects that sounded risky from the start. I still helped because I thought it was my duty. But each time I sent money, I felt a bit uneasy, as if I were building a sandcastle that waves could wash away at any moment. One evening, as I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights, the phone rang. It was Dad. His voice was trembling, unlike usual. "Trevor, I need your help. Just this once." I asked how much he needed, and the amount he mentioned shocked me. About $20,000. I asked why, but he just repeated, "I need the money, Trevor. Can't you help your dad?" I promised to consider it, but when I hung up, I felt a heavy stone in my chest. That was the first time I wondered, am I helping my family or am I nurturing something more dangerous? I drove to my grandmother's farm that weekend, needing her comfort. When I told her the story, she looked at me, her eyes sharp but gentle. "Trevor," she said, "you have a big heart, but don't let it blind you. Family is precious, but sometimes the closest people are the ones who hurt you the most." I nodded, but in my heart I still wanted to believe that my parents and Kyle were just facing temporary difficulties. I didn't want to think that the affection I had for them could be exploited. But as I left the farm, carrying her advice with me, I didn't know that the small cracks in my family were about to become an unbridgeable chasm. 2 years passed and everything began to change, slowly but noticeably, like the way a storm quietly approaches before the tempest unleashes. Dad called more frequently, no longer just short chats about health or the weather. Each time, his voice carried a hint of urgency, as if he were racing against time. "Trevor, I need to borrow some money," he said, and the amounts he requested grew larger. One evening, while I was working late in my small office, Dad called. His voice trembled, almost pleading. "Trevor, just this once. I need $50,000. I lost it gambling at the casino." I sat stunned, gripping the phone tightly. Gambling? My dad, who had once taught me that hard work was the only way to live, was now betting sums larger than his annual income as a welder. I tried to stay calm and asked for details. He hesitated, telling me about trying his luck at a small casino near town, and then things got out of control. I felt like someone had punched me straight in the chest. I wanted to yell, to ask why he would do that, but I only said, "Dad, I'll help this time, but you have to promise to stop." He agreed, his voice full of gratitude, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Kyle was different, but no better. After 2 years, his promising food delivery app officially went bankrupt. He then shifted to investing. He called excitedly, talking about projects that sounded like science fiction, cryptocurrency investment funds, real estate in places I'd never heard of. "Brother Trevor, this is a huge opportunity," he said, his voice full of excitement. "Just invest and I'll handle everything." I tried to be patient, explaining that investing required thorough research and a clear plan. But Kyle didn't listen. He threw fancy terms at me like blockchain, or tenfold returns, which I knew he was just repeating from somewhere online. I refused most of those projects, but when he came to my place, his eyes lighting up like a child begging for a toy, I softened. I gave him another sum on the condition that he work seriously. He nodded vigorously, but his eyes didn't reassure me. I began to realize something I'd been trying to avoid. Dad and Kyle weren't just needing help. They were depending on me. Every time I sent money, they found reasons to ask for more. My mom, though she didn't ask directly, didn't stop Dad either. She called, talking about how Dad was under pressure, or how Kyle was trying to succeed like me soon. I wanted to believe her, but my grandmother's words kept echoing in my head. Don't let your heart blind you. I started questioning. Am I doing the right thing? Is this really the best way to help my family? So one evening I invited my parents and Kyle to my apartment. I prepared a simple dinner, spaghetti and salad like Mom used to make when I was little. I wanted a relaxed atmosphere, but once we sat down, I got straight to the point. Dad, Mom, Kyle, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm happy to help the family, but I think we need to talk clearly about money. Dad, I want you to stay away from gambling spots. Kyle, you need a more specific plan for your projects. I spoke with a sincere and open attitude, hoping they would understand that we could find a solution together. But their reactions weren't what I expected. Dad's face turned red and he slammed his hand on the table. Are you lecturing me, Trevor? Who do you think you are just because you have some money? Mom quickly tried to calm him, but her eyes looked at me with disappointment, as if I'd betrayed them. Kyle smirked and said, If you don't trust me, just say it. I don't need your charity. I was shocked, not by their words, but by the way they looked at me, as if I were the betrayer, not the one who'd spent money buying them a house, a car, and supporting them for the past 2 years. I tried to stay calm, explaining that I just wanted them to live more responsibly. But Dad interrupted. Don't lecture me on responsibility. I gave birth to you, don't be disrespectful. I wanted to argue back, to say I had no intention of being disrespectful, but the words stuck in my throat. The conversation ended in a heavy, tense atmosphere. When they left, I stood alone in the apartment, looking at the unwashed dishes, feeling like I'd just lost a part of myself. After that evening, I decided to reduce financial support. I still sent money to my parents, but less, and I required Kyle to present a specific plan before I invested more. I thought this would help them change, make them understand that I wasn't an ATM. But I was wrong. Dad called, his voice full of resentment. You're stingy with your own family, Trevor. You're not worthy of being my son? Kyle texted, brief but cutting. You've changed. I didn't expect this from you. Mom said nothing, but her silence hurt more than any criticism. I began to feel lonely, even living in the bustling city. I called my grandmother and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, just occasionally murmuring, softly. When I finished, she said, Trevor, you've done all you can. But you can't force others to live the way you want. Sometimes you have to let them face the consequences themselves. Her words were like a bitter pill, but I knew she was right. I just wished I were strong enough to do it right then. In the following weeks, I tried to focus on work, but every time the phone rang, my heart tightened. I dreaded hearing Dad's voice, dreaded Kyle's new requests. I started wondering if I'd been wrong to help them so much. I remembered the days sleeping in the truck when I had nothing but dreams. Back then, I just wanted to make my family proud. Now, having achieved that, I felt like I was losing my family itself. I didn't know that what was happening was just the beginning. The small cracks I'd tried to ignore were growing, and soon they would lead me to a confrontation I could never have imagined. I still wanted to believe that family bonds could overcome everything, that my parents and Kyle would change, but deep down, I began to fear that my grandmother was right, that the closest people could hurt me the most. Several months passed since the heated argument at my apartment, and the atmosphere between me and my family was like ice. Dad no longer called. No more requests for money or reproaches. Mom, who usually played the role of mediator, was also silent. Kyle disappeared completely. No messages, no calls, just a cold void. I checked my phone every day, hoping for an apology, a sign that they still considered me family. But there was nothing. Their silence was like a sharp knife cutting into my heart, one slash at a time, slowly but painfully. I wondered, did I do something wrong? Was I too harsh in cutting back on support and demanding they live more responsibly? Those questions swirled in my head, causing insomnia, dark circles under my eyes, and a weary mind. My small apartment, once a place where I felt safe, now felt like a cage. I sat for hours in front of the computer but couldn't focus on work. My company was still growing, but that success no longer meant anything when I felt lonelier than ever. I remembered the days sleeping in the truck when I had nothing but dreams and my grandmother's encouragement. She was the only one who never turned her back on me, never demanded anything except love. So one Saturday morning, when the city sky was gray like my mood, I decided to drive to her farm. I needed her simple but powerful advice, needed the sense of peace that only she could provide. The road to the farm was as familiar as my own breath. Cornfields stretched out on both sides, golden under the faint autumn sunlight. The sound of tires rolling on the dirt road, the scent of dry grass wafting through the open window. All of it pulled me back to childhood. I remembered summer days running through the fields with Grandma standing on the porch calling me in for hot cornbread. Back then, life was so simple. No money, no responsibilities, just me and her, two free souls in the peaceful countryside. When I parked in front of her old wooden house, she was already standing on the porch, her light blue apron dusted with flour, her kind smile like sunlight dispelling the clouds in my heart. "Trevor, you're here," she called, her voice as warm as always. I got out of the car, hugged her tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of soap and dry grass. "I'm baking, come help me," she said, pulling me into the kitchen. I smiled for the first time in weeks, feeling like a child being sheltered. Her kitchen was just as it always was, a worn wooden table, an old oven, and a radio softly playing country music. I sat down, watching her knead the dough, and felt all my worries dissolve, if only for a moment. "Still troubled about your parents and that Kyle boy?" she asked, not looking at me, her hands steadily rolling the dough. I sighed, not knowing where to start. But with her, I didn't need to maintain a strong facade. I poured out all my concerns, my inner thoughts to her. My voice faltered, my eyes stung, but I held back. I didn't want her to see me weak. Grandma stopped kneading, wiped her hands on her apron, and sat down across from me. Her eyes, marked by time, were still bright and sharp. "Trevor," she said, her voice low but firm, "you've done everything you could. You've given them a home, a car, and more than that, you've given them your love. But you can't force them to appreciate it. Sometimes people are blinded by greed, and it's not your fault if they choose that path." I nodded, but my heart still felt heavy. "Grandma, I just wanted them to be proud of me. I thought if I helped them, they'd see that I'm not the useless son they once thought I was. But now, it feels like everything I've done is meaningless." She took my hand, her rough but warm palm. "Trevor, you don't need anyone to be proud of you to know your own worth. You've built an entire world from nothing. I'm proud of you. And your grandpa, if he were alive, would be too. Don't let others make you doubt that." Her words were like a small flame warming my cold heart. We sat there talking until the sun set, the twilight dyeing the fields outside the window golden. She retold old stories about Grandpa, about the hard times she and he had overcome. "Your grandpa used to say family isn't blood. It's the people willing to stand by you when you fall." I listened, and for the first time I wondered if my parents and Kyle were truly my family in the way she meant. That night I slept at the farm on the old bed in the small room where I stayed every summer. The crickets chirping outside, the wind whistling through the window cracks. It all felt like a lullaby guiding me to sleep. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly, without dreams or worries. But the next morning when I woke up, the sadness returned. I knew I had to face reality. My family, whom I once thought would always be there, had chosen to turn away. I didn't know how to move forward, but I knew I couldn't let this pain consume me. Before leaving the farm, Grandma gave me a small wooden box. "This is what your grandpa left," she said. "He wanted me to keep it for you." I opened the box. Inside was an old pocket watch, its glass scratched but the hands still ticking. "Your grandpa said time heals everything, but only if you choose how to use it." I hugged her, tears silently falling. I didn't promise anything, but in my heart I decided to live true to what she and Grandpa had taught me. To live authentically, even if it meant letting go of those I loved. On the drive back to the city, I felt lighter, but the pain lingered. Grandma had given me the strength to continue, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I had no idea that just a few weeks later a letter would arrive, carrying an invitation to Thanksgiving from my parents and Kyle. An invitation promising reconciliation, but also the start of a bigger storm, one I was unprepared to face. The letter arrived on a rainy afternoon, lying quietly in the mailbox in front of my apartment. The cream-colored envelope with Mom's neat handwriting made my heart beat faster. I opened it, my fingers trembling, not knowing what I was expecting. Inside was a Thanksgiving card edged with vibrant red maple leaves and a handwritten note. "Trevor, my dear," Mom wrote, "Dad, Kyle, and I want you to come home for Thanksgiving. We've had some misunderstandings, but family is for forgiveness. Grandma will be there too. Please come, okay?" At the bottom, Kyle added a line. "Brother Trevor, I'm sorry. Give me a chance to make it right." I read it over and over, my heart a mix of hope and doubt. Their apologies sounded sincere, but the memory of the argument still stung. However, when I saw the words, "Grandma will be there too," I felt a small ray of light. If she was there, maybe everything would be okay. I stood by the window watching the rain patter against the glass, thinking. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep my distance to protect myself. But another part, the one that still yearned for family, whispered that this could be a chance to mend things. I remembered past Thanksgivings when the whole family gathered around the table. Mom's laughter, Dad's grumbling voice, and little Kyle always demanding more pumpkin pie. Could we go back to that? I wasn't sure, but I wanted to try. For Grandma, for the memories that were once beautiful. I called Grandma and told her about the letter. She chuckled softly over the phone. "They invited me too, Trevor. I'll go. I hope this occasion will bring our family back together like before, but remember, don't let your soft heart cloud your judgment." Her words made me uneasy, but I hoped too. I wanted to believe that my parents and Kyle had reflected, that they truly wanted to make amends. I started preparing for the trip home, my heart both excited and anxious. I bought gifts for everyone, a wool sweater for Mom, a book on history that Dad liked, and an expensive fountain pen for Kyle, hoping he'd use it to write out more realistic plans. I wrapped the gifts carefully, as if each sheet of paper was a wish for my family. On Thanksgiving Day, I drove back to the house I had bought for my parents, the SUV gliding smoothly along the familiar road. Outside, the autumn wind was chilly, with vibrant red maple leaves falling scattered, as if reminding me of the old days when family was the place I turned to whenever I was weary. But today my heart beat unevenly, partly from hope, partly from an unnamed fear. I wore a blue shirt, trying to maintain a calm appearance, but my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The bag of gifts I had bought for everyone sat neatly on the passenger seat, and I told myself, as long as they're sincere, everything will be fine. But my grandmother's words echoed in my mind, like a warning I couldn't brush aside. When I arrived, the house was brightly lit with warm golden lights, like a perfect picture of Thanksgiving. The delicious aroma of roasted turkey mixed with the cinnamon scent from pumpkin pie wafted out from the open window. The dining table was lavishly decorated, a pristine white tablecloth embroidered with patterns, flickering candles casting a gentle glow. and a large centerpiece bouquet vibrant with chrysanthemums and maple leaves. Soft country music played from the speakers, an old song that Mom used to play when I was little. Mom opened the door, hugging me tightly, her eyes glistening with tears. "Trevor, you're home," she said, her voice trembling as if I were the son who had been away for decades. Dad stood behind, patting my shoulder, his smile forced but still giving me a glimmer of hope. Kyle appeared with a radiant smile, slapping my back as if nothing had happened. "Brother, thanks for coming," he said, his voice so sweet that I wanted to believe everything had changed. I stepped into the living room and saw Grandma sitting in the corner, her hands slowly knitting. She nodded at me, her sharp eyes seeming to say, "Be careful, Trevor." I placed the bag of gifts on the table and handed them out one by one to my parents and Kyle. Mom smiled, stroking the sweater, saying, "You're so thoughtful." Dad nodded at the book while Kyle twirled the fountain pen, his eyes lighting up. "It's beautiful. I'll use it." I smiled, feeling the atmosphere warming up as if my family was returning to the old days. We sat down at the table and the meal began amid laughter and lively stories. Dad talked about fixing the car. Mom shared about her garden, and Kyle excitedly described a new business idea he was nurturing. He didn't mention money or ask for investment, and I thought maybe he had matured. Mom poured wine glass after glass, her voice gentle. "Drink up, Trevor. Today is a happy day." I sipped, letting the alcohol ease the tension in my heart. Dad raised his glass, laughing loudly. "To family, to good days." I raised mine in response, but when I glanced at Grandma, I saw her only take a small sip, her eyes not leaving my parents and Kyle, as if watching a performance. The meal passed in a cheerful atmosphere, but there was something artificial about it, like a beautiful painting lacking life. The turkey was tender and fragrant, the mashed potatoes smooth, and the pumpkin pie sweet like childhood memories. Kyle kept pouring wine, laughing. "Brother, it's been ages since I saw you drink like this," Dad chimed in, telling humorous stories from his youth that made me laugh. Mom held my hand, her eyes sparkling. "I'm just happy you're home, Trevor." I started to relax, thinking I had worried too much. Maybe their letter was genuine. Maybe they wanted to reconcile. The wine made my head fuzzy, and I let myself sink into the warm, albeit artificial atmosphere. When the meal ended, Mom brought out a plate of sweets, the scent of cinnamon and sugar spreading. I was about to cut a piece when Dad stood up, clapping his hands, his voice suddenly serious. "Trevor, let's talk a bit." My heart sank, as if a door had just slammed shut. Kyle pulled a thick stack of papers from his bag and placed it in front of me with a sweet smile. "Brother Trevor, this is a big opportunity. Just sign here and we'll make it happen together." I looked at the papers, my mind hazy from the wine. The words blurred, but I saw terms like transfer and assets. I tried to focus, asking, "What is this, Kyle?" He patted my shoulder, his voice smooth. "Just a small investment project. Mom and Dad think it's viable too. This is for the family." Dad interjected, his voice low but full of pressure. "Trevor, trust me. This is the best for all of us." Mom bowed her head, clutching the napkin tightly, saying nothing, but her eyes were full of worry. I felt a chill run down my spine. I flipped through the papers, trying to read, but my head spun. Kyle poured more wine, smiling. "Don't stress. Sign it, then we'll eat dessert." I picked up the pen, my fingers trembling as if hypnotized by the fake atmosphere around me. Suddenly, Grandma set down her knitting frame and stood up, her voice sharp as a knife. "Trevor, stop. Don't sign anything while you're not sober." The room froze. My parents and Kyle turned to her, their eyes full of anger. "Mom, what are you doing?" Dad snapped, his face flushed. Kyle jumped up, pointing at her. "You agreed to this plan. Why are you sabotaging it?" I was stunned, looking at Grandma, my heart pounding. She stepped closer to me, placing her hand on my shoulder, her voice low but commanding. "Trevor, I was invited to convince you to sign these papers. They thought I'd help them take your money, but I'd never do that. This isn't reconciliation, this is a trap. I looked at the papers, flipping through the pages quickly, and even with my mind still foggy, I realized the horrifying truth. It was a contract to transfer most of my assets, my company, apartment, bank accounts, into the hands of my parents and Kyle. The alcohol in my system seemed to evaporate, replaced by a painful clarity. "You all," I whispered, my voice faltering. "You were trying to trick me?" Dad stood up, his voice trembling. "Trevor, you've misunderstood. We just want to secure the future." But his eyes avoided mine, and I knew he was lying. Kyle yelled, "What kind of people do you think we are? Don't you trust your own family?" Mom cried, but didn't dare look at me, only mumbling, "I didn't want this." The conflict erupted. "You've ruined everything. You have no right." Dad pointed at Grandma, shouting bitterly. "Enough," Grandma said, her voice cold as steel. "You should be ashamed for exploiting your own son." I stood up, my legs shaking, looking at my family, the people I had once loved more than anything. Mom sobbed uncontrollably. Dad clenched his fists, and Kyle glared at Grandma, his eyes full of resentment. I said nothing, just looked at my parents and Kyle with disappointed eyes. I took Grandma's hand and led her to the car while my heart shattered. As the door closed behind us, I heard Kyle shout, "You'll regret this, Trevor." But I didn't turn back. The truth was too clear. They weren't my family anymore. I stepped outside, the cold autumn night air slapping my face as if trying to pull me out of the nightmare that had just unfolded. Grandma walked beside me, her steps steady despite her age, her hand gripping mine tightly as if to transfer more strength. The lights from the house still spilled out, but they were no longer the warm glow of Thanksgiving. To me, they now resembled the artificial light of a stage, where the family drama had just ended with a painful act of betrayal. We left the house, the dirt road leading to Grandma's farm appearing under the headlights. I drove in silence, not knowing what to say. In my mind, images from the dinner replayed over and over. The fake smiles from Kyle, Dad's evasive eyes, Mom's sobs, and the stack of papers I had nearly signed. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to suppress the anger and pain surging in my chest. Grandma sat beside me, looking out the window, her hands clasped firmly in her lap. I knew she was hurting too, not for herself but for me, the grandson she had always protected. Finally, I couldn't bear the silence anymore. "Grandma," I said, my voice hoarse, "why did they do this to me? I've given them everything, a house, a car, money. I just wanted them to be proud, wanted our family to be happy, but they—" I trailed off, feeling my throat tighten. Grandma turned to me, her eyes gentle but sharp, like moonlight illuminating every hidden corner. "Trevor," she said, her voice low but firm, "I know you're hurting, but I'll tell you everything so you can understand what just happened." She began to recount, her voice steady but weighted. "Before you arrived, your parents called me. They talked about Thanksgiving, saying they wanted to reconcile, but then they revealed the real plan. They wanted me to convince you to sign the papers, a contract transferring your assets to them. They said you owed the family, that you had too much money and needed to share. They thought I'd agree because I'm your dad's mother, because I'm part of the family. But I'd never do that. I pretended to go along, to learn their scheme. They planned to get you drunk, to exploit your moment of vulnerability and force you to sign. I came to the dinner not to help them, but to protect you." I listened, my heart feeling squeezed. Each word she said was like a knife stab, cutting deep into what remained of the trust I had for my parents and Kyle. "They planned this in advance?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They intended to trick me from the start?" Grandma nodded, her eyes sad but unwavering. "Yes, Trevor. The letter, the apologies, all of it was just an act. They knew you loved the family, knew you wouldn't refuse if I was there, but I couldn't let them harm you." I felt tears welling up, silently rolling down my cheeks. I didn't wipe them away because I didn't want her to see me weak, but I couldn't stop them. I had spent years building everything, not just for success, but to bring happiness to my family. I bought a house for my parents, supported Kyle, sent money monthly, all because I wanted them to see that I wasn't the ordinary son they once thought I was. But now, I realized the affection I'd nurtured for years was one-sided. They didn't love me for being Trevor, but for being their source of money. That thought was like a heavy stone pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. "Grandma," I whispered, "what did I do wrong? Why couldn't they love me like I loved them?" Grandma took my hand, her rough but warm palm. "You did nothing wrong," she said. "You've given everything you had, but their greed has blinded them. It's not your fault that they chose that path. You've lived true to your values, and that's the most important thing." The car rolled through the cornfields, the faint moonlight illuminating the dirt road. I looked outside, trying to find some peace in the familiar landscape, but the pain clung to me tightly. I thought about my childhood days when Mom held me in her arms, when Dad taught me how to fix a bicycle, when little Kyle toddled after me around the yard. Those memories had once been my treasure, but now they were like shards of broken glass, sharp and irreparable. I was grateful for Grandma, who had pulled me out of that trap, but at the same time I felt a huge void in my heart, the void of a family I once thought would always be mine. When we arrived at the farm, I parked in front of the familiar wooden house. Grandma invited me in, brewing me a cup of hot tea, the scent of mint spreading through the small kitchen. We sat facing each other under the warm yellow light. I looked at her, the woman who had spent her life teaching me about honesty and resilience. "Grandma," I said, my voice still choked, "I don't know how I can go on. I've lost them." She shook her head, her eyes resolute. "You haven't lost everything, Trevor. You still have me, and more importantly, you have yourself. You've built a life from nothing, and no one can take that away. What you need to do now is protect your heart, and sometimes that means letting go of those who only want to exploit you." Her words were like a small flame warming my cold heart. But at the same time, I felt a new determination forming. I couldn't continue supporting my parents and Kyle, not because I was stingy, but because I couldn't let them keep hurting me. I started thinking about cutting off financial support completely. No more monthly money, no more investments in Kyle's fanciful projects, no more trying to buy their love. The thought pained me, but it also made me feel relieved, as if I were shedding a burden I'd carried for too long. That night, I slept at the farm, in the familiar small room. The crickets chirped outside, the wind whistled through the window cracks, all like a lullaby. But I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I'd lost and what remained. I was grateful for Grandma, who had stood up for me, who had seen through the plot I nearly fell into. But the pain from my parents and Kyle's betrayal was still like an open wound, stinging every time I thought about it. Those days after Thanksgiving, I returned to the city with a heavy heart. My small apartment, once my safe haven, now felt empty. I sat in front of the computer trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to that fateful evening. The fake smiles from Kyle, Dad's evasive eyes, Mom's sobs. I had hoped the dinner would be a new beginning, but instead, it was the end of the trust I had placed in them. I knew I couldn't continue as before. I couldn't keep supporting people who only saw me as a source of money. But the decision to completely cut off financial support was not easy at all. Every time I thought about repossessing the house and car I had bought for my parents, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. They were my family, after all. I spent the whole week pondering, weighing my options. On those long, sleepless nights, I sat in the darkness watching the city lights twinkling through the window. I thought about the difficult years when I slept in the truck, when I worked 18 hours a day to build my company. All that effort I did not just for myself, but also to make my family proud. But now I realized they never truly appreciated me. They only appreciated the money I provided. Finally, after many nights wrestling with myself, I made the decision. I would repossess the house and the car and stop all financial support. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to protect myself, as Grandma had taught me. I contacted a lawyer, an old friend from college. He helped me draft the necessary documents to reclaim the assets. I didn't want to make a big fuss, but I knew this was a necessary step. A week after Thanksgiving, I sent an official letter to my parents explaining that I would be taking back the house and the car. I wrote in a calm tone, but each word felt like a knife cutting into my heart. "I've done everything I could to help the family," I wrote, "but I can't continue when trust has been broken." I also sent a short message to Kyle saying I wouldn't invest in any more of his projects. After that, I turned off my phone, not wanting to hear the criticisms or pleas. The family's reaction came faster than I expected. Just a few hours later, my phone buzzed incessantly. I didn't answer, but Mom texted, her tone full of resentment. "Trevor, how could you do this to your parents? Do you want us to live on the streets?" Dad called, leaving a long voicemail, his voice trembling with anger. "You're ungrateful, Trevor. Who do you think you are to take back what you've given?" Kyle sent a barrage of messages, from begging to threatening. "Brother Trevor, you can't do this to me. You'll regret it, I swear." I read them, my heart feeling squeezed, but I didn't respond. I couldn't let emotions override reason again. Then they started acting publicly. One morning, I received a message from Mom's brother, who lives far away in Japan. He asked why I was abandoning my parents. I was surprised until I opened social media and saw Kyle's post. He had written a long story, accusing me of being greedy, ungrateful, and evicting my parents from their home. Mom shared the post, adding a comment. "We raised Trevor, but now he's turning his back on the family." Dad didn't post anything, but I knew he was behind it because one of his friends messaged me with reproaches. The slander spread like wildfire, and soon relatives and some acquaintances from the town started criticizing me. "Ungrateful child," one wrote. "He's rich now, so he looks down on his parents," another commented. Each word was like an arrow piercing my self-respect. I felt lonelier than ever. I had lost my family, and now the whole community was turning against me. I called Grandma and told her everything. She listened, her voice calm but full of empathy. "Trevor," she said, "people find it easier to believe lies than the truth because the truth is often complicated. But you don't need to prove anything to them. You know who you are, and I know who you are. That's enough." Her words comforted me, but they couldn't erase the pain. I started wondering if I was wrong to cut ties with them, if there was any way to salvage things. But then I remembered the stack of papers from the Thanksgiving dinner, remembered my parents' evasive eyes, and I knew I had no other choice. In the days that followed, I lived like a shadow, trying to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back to the criticisms. Kyle's post was shared everywhere, and each malicious comment was like another stab of a knife. I wanted to scream, to tell the whole world that I wasn't ungrateful, that I had given my family millions of dollars over the past 6 years. But I knew screaming wouldn't solve anything. I needed to take action, and I needed to do it the right way. One evening, sitting in my apartment, I opened my laptop and started gathering evidence. I printed bank statements listing every amount of money I had sent to my parents, nearly $3 million over 6 years, from monthly allowances to payments for Dad's gambling debts. I dug up the investment contracts I had signed with Kyle, the projects that failed due to his lack of responsibility. And most importantly, I still had the stack of papers from the Thanksgiving dinner, the asset transfer contract they had tried to force me to sign. I wasn't sure what I would do with all of this, but I knew I needed to be prepared. I decided to post a video on social media, not for revenge, but to tell the truth. I sat in front of the camera in my simple room, unedited, no script. "I'm Trevor Henderson," I began, my voice trembling but resolute. "I've been called ungrateful, greedy, someone who abandons his family. But today, I want to tell the truth." I recounted my journey, from the days sleeping in the truck to building a multi-million-dollar company. I talked about how I had bought a house, a car, and provided for my parents and Kyle, not to boast, but because I loved them. Then I described the Thanksgiving dinner, the plot to trick me into signing over my assets, and how Grandma had saved me. I showed the bank statements, the contracts, and even the papers from the dinner on screen. "This isn't family," I said, my eyes stinging. "Family doesn't deceive each other, doesn't exploit each other. I've tried, but I can't continue when they only want my money." I hit the post button, my heart pounding. I didn't know what would happen, but I felt relieved, as if I had unloaded a heavy burden. Just a few hours later, the video spread rapidly. Those who had criticized me started to go silent, and the online community turned to condemning my parents and Kyle. "Cold-blooded gold diggers," one person commented. "They don't deserve a son like Trevor," another wrote. Relatives who had once condemned me now messaged apologies, saying they didn't know the full story. I didn't respond, because I didn't need their validation. I just needed the truth to be exposed. After I posted the video clarifying the situation, my parents and Kyle suddenly disappeared from all social media platforms. No rebuttals, no lines of reproach like they used to do. Everything suddenly became strangely silent. I don't know how they felt when the entire truth about our family was exposed. No more harsh phone calls, no more accusatory messages. Kyle, who had never hesitated to criticize me publicly, now stayed silent, as if he understood that this time there were no words left to defend himself. Through the security cameras, I saw my parents packing up and leaving the house I had bought for them a few days later. Watching them trudging along, pulling their suitcases and departing in silence made my heart ache sharply. But I reminded myself not to soften. I had given them too many chances, and each time they chose to hurt me. I knew, though it was painful, cutting ties with them was necessary for me to continue living true to myself. I sat in my small apartment looking out at the city lights and felt a vast emptiness. Not because I regretted it, but because I realized I had lost a part of my memories, the days when I thought family was everything. But then I remembered my grandmother, who had always been there, never demanding anything except love. She was the only light left in my darkest days. I decided to leave the city, not to escape, but to start over, closer to her, closer to the values she had taught me. I sold the apartment, arranged my work so I could run the company remotely, and bought a small piece of land near my grandmother's farm. There I built a simple wooden house, enough for me and her to share peaceful afternoons. I also started a project I had been nurturing for a long time, a center to support young entrepreneurs. I wanted to help young people like I once was, with little money, no one believing in them, but carrying big dreams. The center didn't just provide funding, it also taught them how to build plans, how to fail and get back up. Every time I saw the sparkling eyes of a young person receiving their first loan, I remembered myself 10 years ago, sleeping in the truck with only my grandmother, believing I could do it. I named the center The Flame to remind that no matter how harsh life is, just a small spark can ignite an entire fire. Meanwhile, I heard news about my parents and Kyle through acquaintances in town. They had returned to their previous life, in a small rented apartment on my parents' meager pension. My dad no longer went to the casino, perhaps because he had no more money to gamble. My mom spent most of her time in the apartment, no longer planting flowers or laughing like before. Kyle had to take a job as a warehouse worker, a grueling position with a salary just enough to survive. His dreams of getting rich quick had vanished, replaced by the harsh reality of long days of manual labor. I wasn't happy to know they were struggling, but I didn't feel guilty either. They had chosen their own path, and I couldn't keep paying the price for their selfishness. My new life with my grandmother was a slow healing. I spent more time with her, helping tend the farm, growing vegetables, raising chickens. In the mornings, I woke up early, brewed coffee for her, and we sat on the porch listening to the birds sing and watching the sunrise. She told me old stories about Grandpa, about the hard times she and he had overcome. "You know, Trevor," she said once while we were weeding the garden, "family isn't just blood. Family is the people who respect you, love you for who you are, not for what you have. Sometimes you have to let people hit rock bottom so they know what loss really is." Her words etched deeply into my heart like a lesson. I realized that even though I had lost my parents and Kyle, I still had a family. My grandmother and the young people at the center who looked at me with respect and gratitude. My career continued to thrive. My online company reached higher revenues than ever, but I no longer felt the pressure to prove anything. I lived simply, true to my values, working hard, helping others, and cherishing small moments. I no longer sought recognition from my parents or Kyle because I knew my own worth. My grandmother had taught me that, and I would carry that lesson with me for life. One afternoon, as my grandmother and I sat drinking tea on the porch, the sunset dyed the cornfields before us golden. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of dry grass and mint tea. She held my hand, her smile kind like sunlight. "You've done well, Trevor," she said. "You've weathered the storms without letting them sweep you away." I looked at her, tears silently falling, but this time they were tears of peace. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered. "If not for you, I don't know what I'd be." I thought about my journey, from a poor boy in a small town to nights sleeping in the truck, to the day I built a multi-million-dollar company, and finally to this moment finding peace with my grandmother. I had learned that family isn't those bound by blood, but those willing to stand by you, loving you without calculation. I had learned to firmly cut off toxic relationships, even if they were my parents or brother, to protect my heart. And most importantly, I had learned to cherish those who truly loved me, like my grandmother, like the young people at the center, who saw me not for my money, but for being Trevor. As the sun set, my grandmother and I sat there in silence, listening only to the wind and the rustling leaves. The storm in my heart had passed, and though the scars remained, I knew I had found where I belonged. I took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread, and smiled. Life isn't perfect, but I had found peace amid the storms that had passed.